Moin, and welcome back to our design introduction series. In the last session, we started talking about documentation, we started about general overview of what the documentation is. We talked a bit about the creative overview, and today we will start talking about the next few topics. We'll start about the meeting topics. So this kind of splits itself for larger team and smaller teams. For larger teams, you want to track all of your main team meetings. This would be your sprint review, maybe an introduction, maybe a quarterly session, whatever you do. And you want to have a section for all of these meetings in this category, and then all of the sub meetings that belong to that category. And it's basically just a place where people can put in any questions that would belong into this meeting. So you can, on one hand, people remember all of the things that they want to know for these meetings. On the other side, your team can prepare, leadership team can prepare for any of these questions, so you actually have the answers for them. And then basically just have meeting news for this. This is also where you put all of the results for these meetings in, and specifically, this is specifically for larger meetings, not for all of the smaller ones, but larger ones should have some form of tracking. For smaller teams, you usually don't have a large meeting structure, so anything 6 or less people, because this is just not needed, but maybe you still have a quarterly review, maybe you still have a get-together somewhere. Again, track all of these things here. But for smaller teams, it's way more important that you just have a general overall outstanding questions list and then some dates relating to them, so you see when you had which questions and how you answered them in the long run. So this brings us to production information. This is basically anything that you need for the overall planning of your project. And also describes whatever project plans you have, and there's also usually a small description for what the team is. So each person in the team and what role they have, and sometimes what responsibilities they have within that role. This starts with the project roadmap. The project roadmap is just a plan for the entire project and just a rough schedule for, hey, this is what you do at which point of the project. So first 2 quarters of the project, we develop our enemy AI. The next quarter, we place them in levels and so on. Or we start the game with creating a player, and then after we have created a player, we will create ability X and Y. So basically, a high-level plan for player controls, abilities, enemy systems, what you want to tackle in which order, and who would be which team would be roughly taking which task at any given time. This also works really well if you divide your team in focus groups. So if you have different teams that are smaller teams compositions that tackle specific topics, because now you can put these different topics into your project roadmap and you know when each of them should be completed. The big advantage of this type of roadmap, or generally in having a roadmap, is that you can see when you don't match your time expectations, which means you usually have to rearrange something or throw something out, so you can make sure that the game still stays on track for its actual development. So let's say we take 2 weeks longer for our player creation, and we have planned our roadmap to fill out our entire project space. This means somewhere else we need to scuff off 2 weeks, which usually means that something else has to be kicked out. We plan these roadmaps usually with a certain amount of buffer. It's usually about 25 to 30% of the project duration, so we can have overrun, but you should never try to actively use that overrun. So even if you have that buffer zone and you require 2 more weeks on something, you should still think about what else you can remove, because the buffer is not there that you can now build into the buffer. It's more there so that if it's necessary, you can go into the buffer. Okay, then relevant Jira links or whatever your production tools are. So whatever tool you use to track what tasks are still relevant for your team, this is just a list of relevant links for that tool. So where can you find what, essentially? And sometimes even a short description for how you actually work with this tool. So we use these and these descriptions. This way is how we build our tasks and so on. Then we have a benchmark list with description. this usually starts with like the definition of what our ready to test benchmark state for the project would be, and kind of predicts hardware requirements. And then obviously, once we have the benchmark, then the hardware requirements will be tested. Once the benchmark is ready, test information and shareware requirements would be added. So how can you play that, and what are the results? And the purpose of the benchmark, for anyone that doesn't know that, is that you have a short section of your game that resembles the final product, and you usually use this to test hardware requirements to get a feel for how the game feels out and all from the design perspective, but on technical perspective hey, what type of PC or like console would you actually, or what type of hardware do you need to actually run that game? Then a milestone list with descriptions. So this just goes over the major project goals, whatever needs to be done for the entire thing to be completed, and then the different phases where you go through. So you have your pitching phases where you desire possibilities start of the project. So you just check what's possible. Then we have the project start. This is where all of the overall project goals are ready. So you have like an overall outline of what the game should be in the end, and the team is ready to work. We have our pre-production. This is where the major goals are defined. We usually have a running prototype. We know what the game should be, and we now have to make that. In production, we complete all of the elements that we need to complete the game. So all major content elements are done. And we also make sure that, ideally at the beginning of production, this is also the section, or like close to the beginning of production is also the section where we should complete the benchmark to make sure that all of this actually works out. And then post-production, all of the entire product is completed. Now it starts to play test and test if the game works, and have some additional balancing, make sure that people in testing actually like the product. Usually this is not a clear cut. Usually you have some testing already in production. Well, in fact, you should have testing throughout the entire project. But it becomes really dense in post-production where you really want to like nail the details. So in the beginning of the section, you check more if the general product works, if people enjoy that, if they understand all of this. But in post-production, you really check for details, like is every element of the game up to the standards that you would like to have it for shipping. And then release, this is where your game is content complete, and there are ideally there are no relevant issues left. And then you could also have like a post-release phase where you keep patching the game. This is like really high-level list and not necessarily the same like milestones that you will have, but essentially divide your project into milestones, have like certain dates for them, and then like define what it means for the project in that to be in that state. And then if you can't manage to do that, you know that something has gone wrong. And again, this is a call for rescheduling all of the plans that you have from there on. Then we have a definition of our product and feature quality levels. This is just a definition for what task, what it means for a task to be completed. Like essentially a special description which contains all of the things that need to be done for any task to be set to done. And then depending on what types of tasks you have, like bug tickets, feature developments, and so on, you generally just have a list for all of them, what it means to complete a task, and what maybe who should review that task, and then how to set it done. List of team members with contact informations. Basically just an entire list of team members with their responsibilities, specific things they work on the project. So essentially, if you have questions about something, this is the person you want to talk to. And then some way of contacting them. So if you use Slack, their Slack ID. If you use emails, their work email address. Like some way to make sure that you can get in contact with every team member. And then whatever licenses are available and overall consents that you have with the project. This is like not for hardware. This is something that hardware and software elements. This is something we talk about later. This is for like the actual game content. So all of the music elements, voice acting, outsourced work, contract work, and marketing deals. So anything that's not part of your company needs to be listed somewhere. This is usually where it is. And basically, it's just, hey, we have the rights to use these and these things in these ways. So people are aware how they can use all of the voice acting or music elements when they build a game with these pieces. Okay, as we move over to feature briefs. Feature briefs are by far the largest section of a game design documentation. This is where basically everything that is in your game is listed in some way. And well, because of that, this means that this is something, like, essentially every time you add something to the game, this will end in this section. There are two fundamental versions of creating feature briefs, and like obviously there will be more, but two that I want to talk about, and we will just go over them in a second. From a general thing, so anything that's contained in your game should be part of the feature brief section. If you change in design in early stage, this usually means that you need to update these feature briefs so people are aware that this happens later. And then like the main topics for that are like what like essentially things that always come up is like what characters do you have in the game? How do you control your player characters? What abilities and items exist? Upgrades and unlocks, vehicles, inventory, UI and menu systems, checkpoints and save systems, and like basically any system that's in your product. So if it's part of your game and it's some way, like it describes itself in some way that's not just a visual element or just like a background system, like if it's something that's player facing in your game, it's probably a feature and requires a feature brief. Yes. So let's quickly go a bit over the feature brief structures. Feature brief is a description of an element that's directly added to your project and should add direct value to the final and shippable product. We will talk in design. You talk a lot in feature briefs, but throughout the project, like throughout the entire team structure, this is also true. And usually, a feature briefs are something that is created by design and then moved over to the rest of the team. So you will talk about feature like across these features using these feature briefs. There are two versions of this. I will first talk about the more expanded version. This is usually more useful for larger teams, simply because it requires more time. So it usually requires someone that really does not much else than design elements and then create documentation for that. The advantage of this version is it becomes way more sorted, and it's easier to like separate the page into different elements. This also is a good way to already include current production states for these features so that there will be like a tracking system in there that just says, hey, this is already in the game. This isn't this current state. Yes. So in this version, we split the feature brief contents into certain subpages and then combine them all under a master page. The master page contains a feature summary, who is the feature owner, usually the relevant for each department. So who's the designer responsible for this? Who is the coder responsible for this? Does this have art elements? And if yes, who is the artist that creates them? Then a state of completion. Is this already built? Is this already in engine? Is this currently planned? Is it still needing a review before it can be built? And so on. And then it links to its subpages. And the subpages is where the actual feature is contained. We have a direction page. The direction page contains the feature's purpose. So how does it relate to our core pillars? What is our direction description? So what goals do we achieve with that? Do we have like any references where we can compare this with other games or other like things that can explain how this mechanic works? And then what makes it successful? So if we let's say we add a new door to our game, and the success criteria is that people understand that they can go through it and they can actually do it. It also like blocks sight into the room before it's opened, and it will block sight outside of the room once the players pass through it. And then maybe we have some additional criteria there that we actually use this as a loading screen to pass between different sections. Success criteria essentially just list all of the things that need to be completed for the feature to be considered complete. So then a confirmation that all of the different owners of the of these features are in like agreement that this is how it should work. So like something that says, hey, we are ready to proceed. And then a link back to the master page. This is like usually you have this like in the same structure that we have our entire documentation here. So it's basically like master, and then we have the subpages. We still create the links just in case something gets lost somewhere. Then we have our description. This contains a step-by-step feature description. So what does the feature actually do? What does it contain? It contains a player perspective. So like how does the player perceive that feature? And then it links to other relevant GGG pages. We will talk about this a bit later as well when we talk about glossaries. But essentially here we want to make sure that if we add these doors and these doors use our general interaction system, that this page also links to the general interaction system, so people can go deeper into how this will actually work, not just like how the feature in itself works. And then we link back to past for the same reason as we talked about before. Then we have the implementation. This is now a more code-related side. So there are different versions of writing documentation. Like sometimes you have like split documentation between design documentation and tech documentation, but I would heavily recommend you to have a feature documentation like this one, and then have code and design and art all write their own elements onto this page. This makes it so that everything that relates to one feature is in one place. Yes, so this contains all of the required art assets and code work, all of the implementation details. So how does this actually work? File names and folder locations, where can you find this in the engine? And then again, back a link back to the master. And then we have a user guide. This is basically just a setup guide for how to use this feature as a team. So how we are back to our door example, and it's basically just how do I place these doors in levels so they function properly. And to like this is like the functional contents of each of these pages. I quickly give like an outline as well for what the purpose of these pages are. Like the master page serves as a landing page for organizational reasons. Gives a one-line summary of the feature so people can quickly read up on what this is, and then contains information on how to contact like relevant people, and shows the current implementation state so you can check the current state of work of progress state. And then we have our feature direction. This gives you, quickly mute something here. This gives you a high-level description of the intentions of the feature. So what do we want to achieve with that, and how it brings how it improves the product. It gives some useful references and to deepen understanding what this feature, what the goals of these features are for the overall development, and defines what makes this feature a success or a failed attempt. So essentially, the definition of, hey, this is good and this is bad, this is what we want, and then also why we want that. Ideally, this also helps to create like an overall image for whoever is working on that for what the project as a whole is trying to achieve. So the more features you have like read up on or worked on, you get a better and better understanding for what the overall project goals are. Then we have our feature descriptions. This defines how the feature should function during gameplay, and defines how the feature fits into the product. It describes every element of the feature in detail. This is like the bare bones, the design team describes what the thing should do type of like documentation. Then the feature implementation specifies technical details, tracks required elements for the features, and hence team members that are supposed to work on this feature in the future the required information. So if something is broken, you will find how this works here, so you have an easier time fixing this later. This is usually what comes more from the implementation side, so how the project is built on a technical or visual level. And then the feature user guide, this allows team members to work with the completed feature without taking too much time from people that have created the feature in the first place. And also like avoids potential user errors. So essentially, instead of having like the creation team explain how this works again and again and again with every new person working on this, there's now documentation that explains the bare bones version of it. And obviously they will still be there to answer questions, but you don't have to ask every little bit now. So for this version, basically what we had here is we have our master page that contains the entire structure. Essentially the way that what we just talked about. It contains the feature owner and the current state of the feature and links to all of the subpages. And then we have our direction, again, same what we just talked about. We have our description, again, also like here, the contents of the actual feature, the design, like the more traditional design description of a feature, implementation, the traditional implementation description, so how does this actually work on a technical level, and the user guide, how do I use this feature. I would want to quickly talk about another version for that. This is more for smaller teams. This is basically just putting all of these things into one page and then just having an implementation page to like separate a few technical informations. So this puts up a situation where we have an overall description for the feature first. Wait, no, it's like down here. So this is just what the page is. Yes, so here's like the example. So we first have a feature summary. This is quickly summarizing what the feature is about. This is for people to quickly glimpse what this is about without needing to read the entire documentation. Then we have our design goals, quickly estimating what things we want to achieve here, like stating what things we want to achieve here with these features. And then we list a few gameplay use cases. So in our situation, this is like a game where you control a crane. One of these use cases is that the player can control the crane whatever they want, because we're currently talking about the like input elements that the player has available to them. Then we have a feature description. This is like an in-depth description of how all of the elements that relate to these features should work. And then we also have like an example use case. So how could the player actually interact with that? And then we have our supporting materials here collected, which is, do we need anything for art? Do we need additional code snippets or something like this? Like essentially what needs to be built for, like what needs to be built in preparation before the implementation of this feature can be started? Or what will be supporting material to help the implementation of the features? Frame that better. And then we have a list of our responsible team members, just listing whoever you want to contact if you want to talk about these features in like any way. And then there is the technical description for that. It's basically the same that we had before. We still will split up the actual implementation details from the base version, just so that essentially to allow the implementation team to have a space for themselves to write all of the information that they need, without like muddling the actual design in terms of, hey, this is what how it should function, and this is why it should function in this way. Between the two versions, I tend to use the second one way more frequently because I've been working with smaller teams recently, but working with larger teams before, this version is definitely superior if you have the situation that you have to navigate whatever your product is, like your team. Like if you have to communicate this for like 50 plus people, you definitely want to go with this version, simply because this makes it so people can find stuff way easier without contacting you. This means that people don't need to know that you exist, and it also sets up a situation where they can find stuff way better by just skimming through the documentation. This one is way faster to set up, so I would recommend this for any team that's larger than like 30 people. simply because this will be like easier maintainable for you. You don't have to have someone that just does the documentation and nothing else. If you're in the spot between like 30 to 50 people, decide for yourselves what you think works best for your team. And with this, I think we will end today's session, and we will see each other in the next week. I hope you had a great time, and we'll see you then.